6 locations in the GTA, online, or just give us a call.
StelaVacations.com.
Diving deep into Leafs, Raptors, Jays, and NFL.
Hello and welcome to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. Reminder, we're streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and airing live on Sportsnet 360 Monday to Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Make sure you find the Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please rate and review the show. I am your host, William Liu. Alex Wong continues to be away. Get well soon, Alex. Hopefully this doesn't run over into Christmas and all that stuff. But in the meantime, we have Oren Weisfeld joining us in studio. Famously, Alex Wong's mom's favorite guest. Oren, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm stepping into big shoes here, I feel like.
You're stepping into a big chair too, man.
We don't need to talk about that. But, if I can just perform the Alex role and sit here and chime in every 15 minutes.
So
that's the dream, right?
You gotta actually like wear your jacket the whole time.
Oh, that's true.
You gotta wear a hat. Like you gotta. I mean, honestly, it's not a very good Alex impersonation you're doing right now.
No, it's not.
You gotta say something about Jay-Z. Talk about how you only watch.
I was really into astrology growing up.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
My mom was an astrologer growing up.
Wow.
So
wow.
That drop really like
resonates with your childhood.
Yeah.
What is this, therapy?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I got some problems, but yeah, that's okay.
That's all good. We all got something. What am I gonna say? So
I'm listening.
Oh wow. Okay. What do we have for today? We have probably more negative Raptors news. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's just like, look, we want to see them eventually snap out of this streak right here. But I think at the same time, when you're going into a game where you're playing the Knicks and you're like 4 or 5 games back of the Knicks, and you're like, damn, I wish we were where the Knicks were. That's just never something I've felt as a Raptor fan any time in the last like 10 years.
Yeah.
So it is a little bit strange. But I mean, look, I think we could start the conversation here and eventually get to your piece. But why is it that the Raptors have underachieved so much this season, Oren?
I mean, that's kind of the problem, I think, when you look at the season as a whole, is like, I was thinking about this, like, there's responsibility on everyone.
Okay.
Right? You know how, like, sometimes it's like as easy as, okay, the coach isn't connecting with them. There's so much more talent on this team than how they're performing. Let's fire the coach, get a new voice in, whatever. Sometimes it's the front office, and it's just a matter of, okay, they're missing this one position. Let's fill this. Sometimes it's the players, and they're just underperforming. I feel like this season, like, everyone deserves some responsibility and has to take some accountability. And that's why that's both like a good and a bad thing. Like, that's why it's not an easy fix. There's not like one thing you can do and then bam, like the problem is solved. But it's also a good thing because it's like, all right, we just need to get out of this ourselves. Like, no one is coming in to save us. There's no new coach coming in. There's no big splashy trade coming in the next 2 weeks. I think everyone just has to be better. Coaching staff has to be better. Some of the players who are playing worse than they were last season have to be better. And the front office definitely deserves some culpability too, just in the way the roster was constructed. Like, we can talk about Vision 6-9, and I don't know where you're at with it, but there are clearly flaws in the roster, and yeah, there's a lot of reasons why they're bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, even the idea of the Vision 6-9 thing, I'm still pretty I mean, look, it is how modern basketball is going to be played, right? You're going to have lots of the more size you have at each position, usually the better, right? I mean, this is not even that recent of a thing. I mean, like you can even go back to look at some of the teams like Magic's Lakers, like the Showtime Lakers, like they're essentially a version of Vision 6-9. This is not like some sort of new idea that they've sort of stumbled upon. It's always been important to get that size, but I think that you need just more diversity of skill set on the team. And to me, the way I'm looking at the Raptors, one of the areas that they just consistently struggle in is guard production. It's the biggest thing when you watch other teams play. You'll probably see it tonight when the Knicks come in. I mean, the Knicks will have better guard production than the Raptors tonight, and that's where you still do need, that to sort of carry your offense for you in a lot of these games. And I'm just not seeing that enough out of this team. I think if we're really going to think about underperforming and things like that, really, the expectation for this season was that we were going to try to grow the talent that was already there. And when they take a next step, that will lift the Raptors into taking that next step. Have you seen growth from the guys on the team outside of Pascal Siakam and maybe OG Anunoby?
Yeah, and like not only our individual growth was expected, but I felt like everything that we heard from Masai and all those guys in the offseason was also like continuity, was like chemistry. That was supposed to be a big thing. And I believe in some of that stuff. Like that can help you take a leap, is just guys learning how to play together on both ends. To me, that's been honestly the most disappointing part of it, is like it seems like they have worse chemistry than they did last season. Defensively, they don't trust each other or know where they're going to be. Offensively, like on the fast break, we had this talk the last time I was here, how good their transition offense. It's been terrible ever since Siakam pretty much got injured. Like their efficiency there is just fallen. And it's like, how do you forget how to play with each other in transition and whatnot? That's the confounding part to me. But when it comes to individual leaps, it's like Scotty and Fred and Trent to an extent have just been worse than they were last year. And when you look at this team and you talked about guard play, it's like Siakam is shooting the highest percentage from 3 on this team.
Yeah,
that's like the story of their season almost. It's like if your guards aren't going to create advantages for you, fine. The Raptors are kind of built so that a lot of their forwards create the advantages. They're different in that regard. But the whole roster construction is that the guards hit the threes when the defense collapses. And we're just not seeing that from Fred and Trent and all those guys. So in that sense, they've taken a major step back.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you just go on the Raptors basketball reference page and you sort by percentages in terms of the shooting, obviously Malachi Flynn is the one standout. He's shooting like close to 50% from 3. So good for Malachi. But we know that obviously he hasn't been playing much this season outside of like very recently. But if you just sort by 3-point percentage and you go through it, the league average right now for 3-point shooting is around 37%. Okay. The Raptors don't have a single guy shooting even league average from 3. Everybody else is either slightly below league average, like an Otto Porter, who hasn't, again, played much this season, so I'm probably not even going to count him, like a Pascal Siakam, who is hitting 35% from 3, which is great. He's actually been pretty good on catch and shoot threes this year, which has been pretty great. Thing is, that's not supposed to be his job. I mean, it's one part of his job, and he's done it well, but if Pascal Siakam is your best 3-point shooter by percentage this season, really points to a huge problem, and you just really need to see more of him. You just need to see more of him kicking out to guys and them actually making their shots. Like you look at overtime in the Sixers game that they just lost. How many times did he set up guys for wide open, catch and shoot threes? And you had either Fred, who was taking them but missing them, or you had kickouts to a guy like Scotty, who at one point caught it wide open behind the line. It was under a minute left, and the Raptors were down 3. Pascal kicks it to him. He, instead of taking the 3, which is the right play there for Scotty, he decides to try to attack Joel Embiid off the dribble against a closeout, ends up taking a bad shot. And that's not even me saying that, like, oh, this is like, the big pivotal moment. The point is that, like, the Raptors' 3-point shooting is so bad, guys don't even want to take threes.
Yeah.
This is like them being selective about threes, and they're still shooting like 33%.
And it even is like beyond that, like Scotty has been doing a lot of passing up threes, and it's not just Scotty. There's a lot of guys on this roster who Pascal creates the advantage. They have an open three. They draw a closeout. And so Scotty drawing a closeout on Embiid isn't a bad thing, but he hasn't learned, like a lot of players on this team, what to do, how to take advantage of that closeout.
Yep.
Put the ball on the floor like Norm Powell used to do this and get to the rack, get free throws or get a bucket. And like there's so many guys on this team. Fred is definitely one of them. Gary is definitely one of them where they draw a closeout and then they put the ball on the floor, they get into the paint, and then it's like, okay, well, I don't really have a great in-between game. I can't get all the way to the rim because in those guys' cases, I'm too small and not strong enough. Scotty's case, maybe the dribble isn't good enough. And so now we're resetting the offense with 5 seconds left. And it's like, Siakam created this advantage for you guys and you're not taking advantage of it. So that's another problem that goes beyond the 3-point shooting. It's like everything's going wrong. That's kind of why I'm a little optimistic is because like
it can't
everything
all go wrong all year.
Exactly. Not everything can go wrong all year. Like I do think some of this stuff is going to turn around when it comes to the 3-point shooting and some of this stuff. And we talked about this before. They are trending in the right direction. Like last game, they played great defense for 48 minutes. Like things are trending up.
53, man.
Right. It was overtime.
That was decent.
So I feel like they just need that one win and it's going to tilt their momentum a little bit. But with that being said, there's no way they've taken a leap forward from last season, right?
No. Well, that's the thing too. You needed to see key areas of development from Scotty, from Precious, even from Gary. We forget that he's 23, and like those 3 players just weren't able to take that step forward. We need to see Fred rebound back to what he was pre-All-Star. That has not happened either, right? And so the basis of optimism coming into the season with the expectation of, I don't know what your expectations were, but for me, it was like you win like 2 or 3 more games, you're in like the 50 to 51 win range.
Yeah.
Right? It seemed reasonable to me because you would have thought that this is the right time in these guys' careers to sort of take that next step, build off the momentum, but that just hasn't happened. Obviously, they've had some injuries, but to be honest, it's like every team in the league has a lot of injuries right now. I'm not trying to hear it, to be honest. Especially when the Raptors were like, we were missing some key guys, or we're not built to win without injuries. I'm like, you just lost to the Warriors without Steph and Andrew Wiggins. Like, I don't think the Warriors were built to win without Steph. So I don't want to hear that right now. Like, you got to figure out ways around it. You got to build enough depth and more importantly, I just think that the defense needs to be consistent. At least we saw that back against the Sixers, which is good. But it is interesting you mentioned just the idea that the Raptors might just actually play themselves back into the season, just even without any sort of moves being added right now currently. What is their regular level? We agree that it's not like a 6-game losing streak level, but what is the Raptors' regular level, having seen them this season? Do you have to reevaluate? Are they still a top 6 team for you or no?
Probably not.
Okay.
They've probably fallen into that play-in range for me. And that's just because the holes on the roster have become something that they can't just gloss over. Like last season, they really glossed over these holes through working extremely hard and out-efforting opponents and guys having career years across the board. And in that way, they just kind of glossed over not having a rim protector, glossed over not having great 3-point shooting until the playoffs when all these issues became exacerbated. So I do think that these holes have kind of become bigger, and they are playing whack-a-mole now where they plug one hole and they put a bunch of shooters and spacers out there, and now there's no rim protection. Or they put a bunch of big guys and now there's no shooting. Like in that sense, the roster needs a retooling for, I think, to take that next step forward. But just on talent alone, it's definitely not this bad of a team. Like it's definitely at least like a 500 team to me. You have this top 10 player. You have OG playing great. You have Fred, who is historically a really good player. And you have a bunch of depth. I actually think there is decent depth on this team when guys are healthy and whatnot. So this is at least a play-in team, like a 7-8 team to me. But there is some clear issues, not just on the court. I don't want to speculate here, but like there are also issues, I think, with just like the role buy-in and like who is doing what, who is the second option behind Siakam, who is supposed to be taking the shots in the clutch, who is putting their head down and sulking after they don't get passed to, and all these types of things that we're seeing with regularity. Like I'm not used to seeing these things from a Raptors team. So in that sense, the mix and the chemistry of guys just seems like a tick off to me.
Yeah.
And that I think can really affect like how you are performing.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think, one of the nice things about being down in the arena is you just have conversations with people, people who are, just covering the team, or people who are even within the rooms that the team is in, or people on the team itself, or whatever, right? You just have conversations. It's part of the reason why we go to the arena so early, right? That's kind of the consensus thing you hear is what you're alluding to there, right? The mix and the chemistry between the group is not great. And we continue to see that obviously on the court as well.
Yeah, and quickly beyond that, like,
Sure.
because I'm not that plugged in to like talk to people, but I watch the bench a lot. And like where I sit in the 100s with the media row is like right behind the Raptors bench. And that's more what I'm talking about. It's just like guys hanging their heads after timeouts, not dapping each other up, not celebrating as much as we're used to when guys make big plays and stuff like that, where it's like that kind of team aspect that I'm used to seeing from Raptors teams.
Sure.
I don't think it's at the same level this year.
No, I hear you. And I know that like people might think about that and think, well, come on, like what are they really there to have you cheering? Do you really want to see them jumping up and down when they're losing? But to me, I'm like, that's an important part of your team that is for any sort of level of sports. Like you need to see like that camaraderie within the team. That's a very, very important aspect to it. And yeah, even come early to a warm up and shoot around. Just watch these guys interact. Sometimes some people interact with people, some people really, really don't. When you come early to a game, you'll notice what I'm talking about. But what am I going to say here? Yeah, you know what? This is another thing that I thought about too, is just maybe this is just like the age that we're in terms of like we're in a really instant gratification kind of time, and you either do something for me now or we just kind of go to the next thing. But like, do you feel a little bit tired of this iteration of the team, or do you think the fan base is already a little bit tired of this iteration? Because we've only actually seen it for 1 year, right? We've seen obviously some characters been here for quite a while, obviously Pascal and Fred and OG, even Chris Boucher, right? But like, do you think that for the fan base, they're already kind of tired of looking at this team? Because when I'm seeing so many people say blow it up, that tells me that like they don't even believe in like the future of what this sort of group could do, in their potential. They're just kind of like, I'm sick of them already as a group.
Yeah, that's where I think the fans are kind of, I don't want to say in the wrong, but like a little premature on this. Like,
Sure, okay.
we do have 50 games left to play this season. The standings are not so crazy that the Raptors can't turn it around and be kind of just as good as a lot of people thought they would be. And I think there is a world in which this exact same team is like 500 right now. Like they're 1-6 in games decided by 3 points or fewer. So they're in a lot of tight games. Their luck has not been great. And sometimes things just go this way. So I do think the fan base is a little premature in that, like, we have absolutely no reason to make any decisions before the trade deadline, really, right? Like, we don't need to decide if this team is tanking or blowing it up or buying right now. We have another month and a half, 2 months before those decisions need to come. And I think it's important for people to remember that. Like, even if the Raptors wanted to make a trade right now, I think other teams don't really. Most teams want to wait until that deadline, right? So it's not really, there's nothing you can kind of do right now. You have to figure this out yourself in that regard. So yeah, I'm not sure. Not sure if I answered your question.
No, that's fair. I don't think there is really a specific right or wrong answer to it. Like, I think if people are tired of seeing sort of the same problems, right, then, it's just a matter of personal preference. But I think for me personally, it's just like, before we trade everybody though, is there another way we can sort of use the roster? You know what I mean? Like maybe change up the way. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you hear something like Joel Embiid saying that, like, tongue in cheek, but it's like, actually, I don't even know if it's tongue in cheek, to be honest. Maybe he's just actually means this, but he's like, yeah, the Raptors don't even care about winning. They just want to stop the star player.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's like, okay, is there something where the way the Raptors are playing, it's either too predictable or it's too, I don't know. Is it getting a little bit stale? Do they just need to change up the way they play rather than necessarily change up the players that they have? Because that's also another way you can potentially get more out of this group is by playing a different way. I don't know how easy that is to do mid-season, but is that something?
No, that's a good question.
Because we always just think about change. Let's change out all the players. Let's just change out the players. But it could be just a different way to use those players.
For sure, that's a good question, and that's where some of this responsibility relies on Nick Nurse and whatnot. Like, to me, it's a bit like the fact that the Thad Young at the 5 lineups haven't worked at all this season is really telling because this roster is built to not have a 7-footer, and it's built to have a bunch of wings who protect the rim together. But yet, when Thad is at the 5 and there are all these wings around him, they're not protecting the rim.
Yeah, they just leave him alone. Like, come on, man. Like, you can't leave the oldest player on the team to just protect the rim by himself. Like, this is ridiculous.
Right. So it's like clearly the system that Nick Nurse has in mind is not being executed, and it hasn't been all season. And there's been questions from him about, are you going to look to change the system, or are you going to keep rolling it out there and hope that they kind of improve their execution? And his answer has always been like, yeah, like I think he is a bit stubborn in that regard, where he has this system in mind and this idea of how he wants them to play in mind. And I think it is a way to maximize the roster in terms of if you play this way that he wants, we can reach a ceiling that maybe is unreachable if you just play maybe a little bit more simple style. But the floor of that simple style, whether it's drop defense, whether it's more pick and rolls on offense, like that floor is higher.
Right.
And we might just be at a point right now where we just need to get to a higher floor and start winning some games and start building some confidence of these guys and that kind of stuff. So I think, yeah, there's definitely something to the idea that they should play a little bit differently, and maybe the roles should also shift. I was saying, like, maybe Siakam just needs more of the ball on offense. And, like, his usage was 33 before the injury. Now it's at 31 on the season, which tells you since he came back, it's been in, like, the 28 range. I want that back up to 33 on the season. Like, he's been that good, so much better than anyone else offensively on this team that, like, if you really want to win games, and we can have this conversation if it's winning or developing, like, put the ball in his hands a little bit more and play a little bit more of heliocentric offense around Siakam, because as I was saying to you, what they're doing now isn't working, so you might as well try something else.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do think if you have a really, really committed defense, which I think the Raptors can get to, and even without the rim protection added to this group, even if they just have what they have right now, and they just play to their potential defensively, you take that with Pascal leading the offense like in that way that you're talking about, I think that can win you games in the regular season. To me, that's like in the playoffs, that's where it's like, okay, that's
fair.
It feels a little bit easy to stop. But listen, we're kind of dealing with kind of stop the losing streak right now in December rather than sort of like how good they will be in the playoffs. But I think that's important to keep in mind because, you know, the bigger thing that we've talked about, and it's a piece you wrote for Yahoo, I believe. It's Raptors learning that you cannot win and build simultaneously in the NBA. Now, let's start with the guys on the team that you already feel like are ready to win. And we'll go there and see how they're doing, and then we look at some of the players that they're trying to develop and whether that development's on schedule or not.
Yeah, I think like a better headline would be like, you can't prioritize winning and prioritize development at the same time.
See, that's a bad headline, so
it's too long.
You got to go for the the clear cut.
Yeah.
Can't win and develop.
But that's what I think the Raptors are trying to do this season, and that's why
what they're trying to do every season mostly.
Yeah. And that's why I want to talk to you and see if you agree, because I know a lot of people don't, in the sense that like people have brought up how the Raptors have done this in the past, but I do think there are some real differences. So I think this year, like, Siakam and OG are obviously like very ready to be, I would say, like the 1 and 3 options on a very good team.
Okay.
And behind that on the depth chart, I think you have Boucher and you have Thad Young and you have Otto Porter, who are vets who are ready to play a role on a really, really good team.
Yeah, okay.
And you always need vets on young teams. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But, like, Fred complicates this a bit because he's theoretically very ready to win, and he was last year. But right now, his play has just been so far behind what we expect from him that he is kind of in the middle here, where it's like, in order to go the winning route and to push in that way, Fred has to be at the peak of his power, which he just hasn't been. But then there's obviously this group of younger players like Scotty, like Koloko, like Gary, Precious, and Banton, all 23-year-olds, who are just not quite ready to play winning basketball, I think, over the course of an 82-game season. We've seen their inconsistencies this season. And last season was better, but I think there is something to the point where the second time around it's just harder to be consistent, to get out for those games, and to have the habits and the routines that are kind of required for, like, that kind of consistency. So there's these two groups, and like Chris Boucher even said to me on the record, very honestly, like, yeah, we have two groups. We have a core group who's ready to win, and we have a young group who is learning and being taught by that core group, and it takes time, and that's where they're at right now.
I don't really. Well, I don't know if you know this, but this is a question that I'm really curious to know the truth about. Is how do you think that young group is accepting of that guidance from the older group this season? And is that like potentially a source of the lack of vibes?
Yeah, like I'm
You know
not
what I
gonna speculate on that, but I wrote in the piece that the message seems to be lost somewhere in the chain of command, right? Like
Yep.
from the front office to the coaching staff to the vets to the young players. That's how it's supposed to go.
Mhm.
Somewhere along that line, I don't know where, the message is being lost because, like I said, guys are not showing up with the consistency that we're used to. And like this is where like Kyle Lowry, I think, fits into things. Like he was just the guy who every night set this tone that was followed, right? Like he came in and he would dive on a loose ball in the first 30 seconds of a game. That's just who Kyle Lowry is, like as a player. And I think it set a tone over those years of like, we're going to be the hardest working team every night, even if we're not the most skilled.
It had a carryover effect even last year when he wasn't on the team.
For sure. Like I think Fred and Pascal have really tried to step into that role and honestly done it admirably in terms of how they play, but you can't set a tone if guys aren't following that tone.
Right.
So that's kind of the difference is for whatever reason, Kyle had this sort of respect that I don't think maybe, I don't want to say respect, but maybe just for some reason he was followed to a degree that these guys aren't. And I don't want to all put that on the older guys because I think there's also something to like Fred and Pascal. When those guys were young, they were just the type of players who are ready to follow in Kyle's footsteps in that regard. This is a new generation, like in a lot of ways, right? Like attention spans are shorter, all of that sort of stuff. So I think they're having trouble relating in some ways to the young guys on the team.
Yeah, and this is where I would think about like some of the guys who are sort of in that bridge area, right? Because like for example, OG's not that much older than some of that other group. Like he's like 2 years older than Gary, maybe 3 years, maybe 2, something like that. I think OG's still 25. So
Yeah, I think too.
it's like I do hope that like there is something that which he can kind of do to sort of bridge the gap between the two groups, you know? And I think it really because it's like, yeah, now that I'm bringing this up and thinking about it, it's like when we had like Kyle and DeMar as our leaders, you know, back in, you know, that era, you never really heard about the young guys like doing anything other than just like listening to those guys and soaking it in. I'm not saying that was like, you know, exactly the case. I'm sure that every NBA player is probably thinking, yo, I'm better than the guy playing ahead of me. You know, I should get their minutes, but still, you just didn't hear about the same kind of problems. I think, you know, the only thing I'll push back on in terms of just like, it's hard to win and develop because you also brought up the Golden State Warriors example, which is, you know, obviously a very good one. This season, the Warriors veterans have been super ready to win another championship. And then they bring in like guys like, I mean, James Wiseman is signed the poster boy for this, even though I don't think he's the only problem. But it's like, yeah, you bring him in and he can't really play at that level, and that level drops and then lose games, and then there's frustration. The thing is, like, if you have enough talent on your team, even if they're young, I think they're ready to win and develop, right? You look at like Memphis, for example, or like New Orleans, for example. Like, I think you just need to have enough talent to sort of get over that. And to me, I'm just like, when I'm looking at the Warriors' young talent, it's just not good enough to help them win, especially at the level that the Warriors have established, which is like at the very highest. And for the Raptors, their young talent isn't good enough for them to win. There's no way around that. Like when I see Memphis and the way they play, they're carried by a lot of young players, but those young players are like John Moran and Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. Those guys are ready to win because they're that good.
Yeah.
So the Raptors just need to get more talent.
I don't think it's an age thing. Like I agree with you. You can be young and be ready to win. Absolutely. And there OG is an example of this. But I think for me it's more of like a professionalism thing. And it's like sometimes it's like, how long have you been in the league? And like have you developed these habits that are required? Because I would push back a bit on the talent thing. Like Scotty Barnes is extremely talented. We know he's better than this. We know he is better than the way he's played this season. We saw it last season. Right. And it's like Gary, I know Gary's better than this because he was better last season. And it's on and on down the list. Even Precious, the way he started this season, it wasn't as good. And
it was not good. Yeah.
You can blame the scouting report being out on them to an extent.
Come on, man.
I don't think that's
okay. Hold on. Do people are people really buying this one? Because I mean, they get scouted every single day.
Yeah. They got scouted last season, exactly. It's like
You
these
got you guys
things are
got it
done.
every single day. That's yeah.
Yeah, so I think young people can absolutely like be ready to win. It's just more so about like a mentality and a
Yeah.
professionalism. And
Yeah.
are you bought in? And I think sacrifice is the word we haven't said here. Like good teams sacrifice a lot of things. They sacrifice shots in the name of winning and stuff
Mhm.
like that. That's where I'm like, is this team ready to sacrifice to win? Like, are all the players on this team and I think with sacrifice, it's usually older guys, right? Who are ready to
Sure,
sacrifice
sure.
for a
Guys who've already been
championship.
paid, or guys who aren't coming up on contract years, or all that
Guys who
kind of
have
stuff.
tried to be the number one option, kind of failed, and now are like, okay, let me take a back seat.
Yeah, like
right?
Marcus Gasol. Marcus Gasol is a classic example. Of
Sure.
this, right? Was the franchise player, comes here to Toronto. I'm gonna be the fifth option, play defense for you, whatever you need.
Yeah. And so that's where I'm not sure the Raptors have like the level of sacrifice needed to buy into smaller roles, kind of around Pascal,
Yeah.
and be this winning team.
Only guys I see sacrificing are Thad Young and Wancho, I guess.
Chris Boucher, he's just like an energy big at this point.
Chris
I think.
Boucher is he recycles possessions. There's nothing for him to sacrifice. He just brings in pure energy, you know. So
Yeah.
I don't see him taking anything off the table for other guys. But yeah, no, it's interesting, man. It's interesting where this team is right now. They are kind of caught between two minds. I agree. And listen, if they continue to not work in that way, odds are that they kind of go in the way where usually the young guys win. Let's be honest. Usually the young guys win.
Yeah. I mean, that's I guess what we're gonna see this trade deadline.
Yeah.
I would go I would go the older route. I've always been out on tanking or blowing it up. I have always been in on if you have a top 10 player, you build around him and his championship window. So that's where I would go, but you're probably right. More often than not, the young guys win out and have it their way because I mean 1,000 reasons for that. So we'll see. But I mean, again, if they just turn it around, we know that this team is talented enough to be in the playoff race and just kind of at least keep it going keep this roster relatively whole for the end of the season at least.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. We're going to take a quick break right here. I've been your host, Will Lou. That's Oren Weisfeld. You're listening to The Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. Welcome back to the Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. I'm your host, Wayne Liu. Oren is still with us. Oren has agreed to be our Alex Wong fill-in today, so you will be here as the co-host for today. And we will soon call up Bobby Marks of ESPN and ask him all sorts of questions. So are you excited to talk to Bobby Marks?
My mic was off. Always good to.
It's all good.
Always good to, yeah.
That actually deepens
These
the Alex impersonation, actually. So
yeah, I mean, it'll be good to talk to a ex front office person about the game. Get some inside scoops.
I feel like I just feel like execs they're just a different breed. You know what I mean? Like they live like a really specific lifestyle, and I just want to know, like, essentially what GMs do at this time of year. So we're joined on the line by Bobby Marks of ESPN. Bobby, thanks for taking the time. Yeah, I think I just wanted to ask and start here because obviously you were a longtime NBA executive. What do GMs and executives do around this time? How busy of a time is it?
Yeah, I mean, you're in that evaluation period. I mean, it's a little bit different than probably when it was in the, mid-October here. I just got back from Las Vegas, so most high-ranking executives were out in Vegas for the G League showcase with the minor league team. I saw Masai out there. That's, I guess, our equivalent of the winter meetings of Major League Baseball, but we're still playing games. That's where kind of a lot of the trade dialogue picks up there. It's funny, we had December 15th last week and everyone made a big deal about it because everyone thinks like trades all of a sudden happen, because most free agents can be traded, and that's not the case. Most trades happen the week of the trade deadline, on the trade deadline here. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's you're in the evaluation period. You're certainly doing college scouting, which is picked up a lot in November. Kind of quieted down now until January here. But you've got a 7-week window with the deadline coming up here to either figure out if you're going to be a seller or a buyer, or you're going to stand pat and you're comfortable with your roster. But it's hard. Trades are hard to make, especially during the regular season when you're limited with roster spots. Some teams are a little more. I mean, you guys saw it with Kyle a few years ago as far as, do you hold on to him? Do we wait until the offseason? Do we do a sign and trade? So that's kind of I think there's a lot more meetings probably going on now, end of December than there probably was back in, mid-October.
Yeah. I think in terms of that evaluation period, like, what are you hoping to see out of your team in terms of like what is real and what isn't real? Are there like specific big wins that kind of change? It's like, okay, I've seen the potential of this group and I want to buy into it, or are there sort of big, lopsided losses where you're like, this thing just clearly isn't working. Yeah. I'm going to go in the other way. Like, what is the evaluation look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it has certainly the health component, right? Like, what does your roster look like whole compared to what does your roster look like when you've got guys out of, if you rolled out this roster and let's say Toronto with a healthy, group, Precious healthy, Otto's healthy, some of your bench guys that have kind of been in and out of the lineup, your starting five is healthy. Like, where does it stack up? Whether if you're in the play-in or whether you're in, one of the top 6 teams here, as far as some of these other teams. I think that's probably the big barometer. I mean, the hard part is that I don't know if you're going to see that, with some teams as far as they're never really going to be whole. So that's the big thing. Certainly, yeah. I mean, I think if you're Chicago and you give up 150 points to the Timberwolves without Karl Anthony Towns, that's concerning, right? Mm-hmm. But there's this notion out there that everyone says like, blow it up. I mean, I think you can. I guess the popular word now is pivot. You can kind of pivot, right? So you can stay competitive, but maybe pick up a draft pick or two here. I think similar to what Indiana has done and what Utah has done, where they're not just mediocre without upside. They've got a bunch of draft picks and they've got young players, and you can do that and stay out of the luxury tax.
Yeah, no, and I think the interesting thing with the blow it up thing too is just I don't know If sort of you've been ever in that situation where midseason you're like, look, the team is just not happening, and we just need to sort of go in an entirely different direction. But what kind of conversations had to take place with ownership in a standard process like that, where you need to sort of get to sort of sign off to even do something like that? And of course, the conversations that you have with your longtime players, who obviously you have a lot of equity in those guys.
Yeah, I mean, we went through it in 2013-14 in Brooklyn when we had, we made the big trade with Boston, and I think we were like 11-19 at the heading into Christmas, and we're like, man, like this is not working at all. And fortunately, not for Brook Lopez. Brook broke his foot in Philadelphia right before Christmas, and we wound up putting Garnett at the 5 and Pierce at the 4. It kind of changed things around a little bit here, and we kind of just we stood with it, and things turned around. And that's not going to happen for everyone here, but yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think Toronto's a little bit different than Chicago. Chicago basically went all in a few years ago with the Vucevic trade, DeRozan, Ball. They've traded away a lot of draft picks. I think sometimes teams get caught up as far as, we've already traded away 2 first-round picks, right? We can't go to the retool route because we owe the Magic a first. We owe the Spurs a first here. And they're hard conversations because then you're telling that you basically sold ownership a plan a few years ago, and now you're going back to them and say, you know what? I don't think we're a playoff team. We're going to retool, and you're basically back to square one where you were, in 2020. So it's hard conversations here. You'd love to have, more of a body of work. Fortunately, the trade deadline really isn't the halfway point. I mean, most teams will play 50 games, and that's a big reason why you see 85% of the deals happen the week, because teams are waiting until the last minute for that best deal. And if they don't get it, they're comfortable kind of walking away from it.
Hey, Bobby, Oren Weisfeld here. You mentioned Chicago, and they're a team that went all in and obviously didn't work. But the Raptors are kind of in the opposite camp where, like you said, they have all their picks, and now they have this roster with some major flaws in it. Do you think the Raptors are maybe feeling the regret of not trading any of those picks in past off seasons, past trade deadlines to upgrade, whether it's the rim protection or the shooting, and kind of maybe this could be a very different looking team in hindsight had they gone a little bit more in around this team?
I think, it's I always say you usually only have really one big swing at it. When you do go all in, what does all in mean? Is it 2 picks, 3 picks, swaps, that kind of nature here? And if you don't do it, if you don't get it right, I mean, you're looking at probably like Minnesota right now, right? Like they went all in. It's worked out for Cleveland so far here. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's the matter of how you value draft picks. I think probably, certainly they traded, the one last year to get Thaddeus, but I think to leave yourself exposed with unprotected ones, teams are a little more reluctant to do that here. So I think, certainly, I think a lot of it had to do, Scotty comes off Rookie of the Year and has taken a little bit of a step back, right? Like you thought and I think he still can be that, that foundation piece here, and you build around him, and, you're going to basically build off the Philadelphia playoff series. It hasn't happened. A lot of it's injuries, some of it I feel like, a little bit fatigue. A lot of minutes from the starters here. Nick's reluctant, to go deep in the with this group here, and then some of it has to do with you're top heavy with bigs. You don't have many guards. You don't have many shooters outside of Gary. Not a lot of playmakers here, so it will be interesting as far as where Toronto is. When we get to, I guess, late January, early February, because the picks, at least this year, has some value. It's hard for me to see them, if they're 4 games under 500, giving away an unprotected, 2023 first here. So I think if you're going to go all in, you do it, but you have to have kind of that, an asterisk next to it saying like, this might not work out, and here are the consequences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the Raptors choose to go in the other direction and actually start to move some of the core pieces, we already starting to hear sort of like what the shape of that could look like, because as much as it's not necessarily working here, there's very clear pieces on the Raptors that could help other teams that would be of interest. I think OG Anunoby's name was brought up. I think Zach Lowe described it as similar to what Donovan Mitchell sort of brought back to Utah, which I think a lot of people were sort of caught off guard by. I mean, can you sort of explain the specific reason why OG Anunoby is so useful to teams right now? Because obviously Donovan Mitchell is a guy who had made multiple-time All-Stars. We understand why the trade package was that. No one was surprised. Why is it the same for OG Anunoby right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think for OG, I think you could probably make a case. He's probably been the Raptors' best player this year. He's got another year left. He's got this year and he's got next year, and then he's got a player option after that. Wings are a premium in this league. Everyone craves to have, a 6'8", 6'9" guy that can defend, give you, 15, 16 points offensively here. I think he's kind of come to his own as far as, guy that's, willing to take the ball in his hands at the end of these games here. I think the package, if it's probably similar to what, Atlanta had to give up for Dejounte Murray, where you're giving up, unprotected, 2 unprotects, a pick swap here. We'll see if it ever came to, players here. But yeah, I think everyone on that roster has got, good value here. Fred and Gary are a little different because they've got, player options here. They can become free agents. Certainly Pascal's got this year and next year. Scotty's basically kind of untouchable, but Chris has got, a good contract. If they ever wanted to, I'm not going to say tear down, but if they wanted to kind of start looking at what they can get for some of these guys, if they've seen enough with this group, yeah, they can kind of build up their draft assets and probably still stay competitive.
Yeah. Well, one guy that's probably, if we're just reading the tea leaves here, it just looks a little bit likely that Gary's future with the Raptors won't be too much longer beyond this year. What would a proven shooter like Gary Trent Jr. what would be the expected command? Obviously, he's going into the possibility of free agency, most likely, to be honest. But a team getting him would get his full bird rights and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. What would Gary's trade value look like?
I think you have to be comfortable. Where you are. Is he that missing piece either coming off the bench? Is it a protected one? For him, certainly you'd have to send it back salary that, gets within that, close to his number here. I just think it's a matter of what you want to pay him. What does your roster look like? Gary's probably your fourth best player, right? What is the fourth best player on your roster? I'll give you an example. If he was going to Memphis in a deal, let's just say, hypothetically, it was, Danny Green in a one.
Okay.
But Memphis already has, John, Jaren, and they got to pay Dez, and that group. They just paid Steven Adams, and so maybe he's more of a rental. So I think it depends on if he's a rental compared to something long term. But I do think guys like Gary, probably Jordan Clarkson, there's probably a protected one out there for them. The hard part is there's only 9 or 10 teams that have picks. That's the challenge.
That's true.
Toronto's one of them. Phoenix is another. Certainly we've talked about OKC and teams like that. Utah is another team that they control the. New Orleans is another team. They control the monopoly of it's a third of 2/3 of the NBA don't have a ton of draft picks. So that's the other challenge here, is finding a team that that can trade one, and B is kind of willing to give that up.
Yeah. All right, Bobby. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and I'm sure we'll be calling you again soon before the trade deadline.
You got it. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right. That was Bobby Marks. Not the only GM Bobby to appear on this program.
Yeah, when Alex told me you guys were calling Bobby at 3:30, I'm like, what? I'm staying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so.
And then I was like, oh, that Bobby.
Well,
but no, that was great. No disrespect to Bobby Marks. I'm just saying, if Bobby Webster, was a Raptors GM, there's a difference.
Hey, Bobby, listen, Bobby, actually, I know Bobby doesn't listen to this, but I know other people in the org do. Please, make yourselves available. I feel like people want to. It'd be cool if I asked Bobby Marks this questions, but I feel like I think at this point, when the Raptors are struggling like this, people do want to hear a voice from the front office, just in terms of what's going on. But anyway, look, it's time for Between the Lines, brought to you by Bet Rivers. It's a whole new game. We're going to preview the game tonight, Oren. The line for tonight's game at Bet Rivers is Knicks -1.5. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I got the Raptors. I think they're
Okay.
going to break out of it tonight.
Wow, you're stealing
I'm
my
hopeful.
move. Okay.
The Knicks are on the second night of a back-to-back.
Okay.
They have won 7 straight. They're playing really good basketball right now. But
They had a bit of a
Look,
soft schedule. I'm not gonna lie.
Exactly.
I peeped what that 7-game win streak was.
the
It's,
thing is, if the Raptors play as well as they did against the Sixers the other night,
Yeah.
I just think this is one of the rare games on the schedule where I think the Raptors just have more talent, right? So if you
Okay.
play hard, you have more talent. I think that's a win.
okay, so that's how it should be, and that's why my advice here is probably just like, look, first off, just stay away from the Raptors until they really show you something consistent, right? Because it's just hard to predict specifically night to night what they might do. The line looks very low for a team that literally just smacked the Golden State Warriors, who, by the way, smacked the Raptors earlier this week. So it doesn't necessarily sound like the Knicks should only be up 1.5. But I think for me, it's like, you're right. The talent there is really strong. Now, the thing for the Raptors is the difference is the Knicks actually have rim protection, whereas the Raptors don't. And so for me, it's like if the Raptors find a way to protect the basket, like they did against the Sixers. Now, I think they have a specific strategy they play against the Sixers each time, and they've rehearsed it quite a bit because they played each other a lot. We'll see if they can protect the rim well enough. If they can do that, then I think this game will be pretty close. The two teams are actually built kind of similarly when you really look at sort of just across the board. But, depending on whether or not Gary's available, I think he's questionable. I think the Knicks are mostly healthy outside of like Obi Toppin and a couple other pieces. So, yeah, I mean, the Raptors really should the Raptors should be the pick.
Yeah.
But I think until they show me more on the road, I think I'm probably still going to be on the safe side and maybe lean with the Knicks. And yeah, it's tough to be in a situation where you're like, I wish we were the Knicks, But like
The Nets, the Sixers, all these like fraught franchises.
we're bottom of the
just
Atlantic
like,
again, man.
It'd be really nice to be that historically really awful franchise right now, wouldn't it?
Remember when we were like, yo, I can't believe we're hanging these Atlantic Division banners,
Yeah.
Now I'm like, yeah, wow, the Raptors are actually at the very bottom of that division right now. So it's it's tough times, but no, hopefully I think man, I really wanted to pick the Raptors, but I just think that they have only 3 road wins,
Yeah, at least the fan base is taking it well right now.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know what? When the Knicks were a losing team, which is as recently as last year, I think the one thing that the fan base did really well was always approach it with humor and still show a lot of pride, even in the occasional wins that they did have. So I do kind of, maybe if there's like an advice to like copy the Knicks fans of just like, yeah, handle losing with a little bit of humor.
Yeah, like if the Raptors win today, we should hit the streets.
No, we
is
got
what you're
someone's got to
saying.
yell
Get
bing
the
bong
video, yeah.
in Young and Dundas Square. But anyway, that was Between the Lines, brought to you by Bet Rivers. It's a whole new game. Oren Weisfeld, pretty good audition as co-host. I think we're gonna get Vivek in here tomorrow to sort of try to do the same thing, and we'll see who the backup Alex will be. But you've done quite well for yourself, young man.
Wow. Thank you. Keep doing your auditions, your job reviews, and get back to me. Just hit me up in my email. Let me know if I got it or not.
This is the elevator music our producer Derek likes to play when he's bored. So anyway, that does it for us today. I've been your host, Will Lou, and you've been listening to The Raptors Show on the Sportsnet Radio Network. Make sure you find The Raptors Show where you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please rate and review the show. Thanks again to Oren Weisfeld. Thanks to Bobby Marks, our board producer Derek Brandale, and Jennifer Roloff for helping us with the YouTube stream. We'll be back tomorrow.